I woke up gasping for breath, my lungs burning like they were filled with acid. Darkness pressed down on me, thick and suffocating, but it wasn't the pitch black of my bedroom. No, this was colder, emptier, wrong. I tried to move, but my arms were pinned at my sides, wrapped tightly in something slick and sticky. Panic clawed up my throat when I realized it wasn't blankets, it was something alive. A grotesque slithering sound whispered in my ear. I felt damp tendrils slide across my neck, tasting my sweat. My heart thundered, each beat a deafening drum inside my skull. Somewhere in the dark, something breath slow, ragged, hungry. Then, a low voice rasped inches from my face. "You never should have come here." A sudden flare of pain exploded across my chest. Hot, sharp, wet. I screamed only to choke on the foul, coppery flood that gushed into my mouth. As the darkness swirled, I glimpsed my reflection in a shattered shard of glass on the floor. My eyes were hollow voids, blacker than the dark around me. And just like that, I remembered Di had woken up here before, many times. And each time, it ended exactly like this. My name is Marcus Reed. I'm 32, work in IT, live alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of town. And until a month ago, my life was painfully ordinary. I spent my days buried in code, my nights curled up with cheap takeout and low-budget horror flicks. I never believed in any of that supernatural crap. I always figured the only monsters out there were the ones wearing human skin. That changed when I moved here. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After my mother died, I inherited a small sum and decided to finally escape the suffocating familiarity of my childhood neighborhood. I found this place online, 2-bedroom, under market value, tucked away on a quiet street lined with sagging oaks that formed a kind of tunnel over the cracked asphalt. It felt peaceful, private to private, maybe. From the start, there were little things that didn't sit right. The key was already in the door when I arrived, dangling from the lock as if waiting for me. The previous tenant had left in a hurry. The landlord said, "No forwarding address, no cleanup." I discovered unopened mail piled by the door, cereal gone stale on the counter, a faint smell of damp earth clinging to the walls. I told myself it was nothing. People leave messes behind when they're in a rush. But then there was the basement. I found the door on my second night, hidden behind an old wardrobe pushed carelessly into the hallway. When I dragged it aside, the smell hit me first like wet concrete and rotting leaves. The door was unlocked, and when I pulled it open, I half expected to see rats scuttling across the floor. Instead, there was just darkness stretching down, deeper than it should have been. I flipped the switch by the door. The single bulb flickered once and went out. I laughed it off. I was being dramatic, letting my imagination fill in the blanks. I didn't bother with it again. Still, the apartment never felt entirely mine. At night, I'd wake up certain someone had just left the room. I'd lie there, heart racing, staring at the open doorway, waiting to see a shadow that never appeared. Sometimes, things moved. Small things, insignificant on their own. A coffee mug I knew I'd left by the sink would turn up on the coffee table. The bathroom door, which I always kept closed, would be cracked open a sliver when I returned from work. Once, I found my laptop screen on, lines of gibberish code scrolling by. My hands hovered over the keyboard, as if they itched to continue typing. I blamed stress, the move, the new job demands, grief I hadn't processed. But deep down, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Not just with the apartment with me. I started having strange dreams. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the taste of dirt in my mouth. Sometimes I'd find tiny scratches on my arms or thighs, like I'd been clawing at myself in my sleep. Then came the noise. It started as a faint ticking sound, always just at the edge of hearing. I'd pause mid-sentence on a call, straining to catch it. When I stopped moving, it stopped too. I'd convince myself it was pipes, or settling wood until it began following me. I'd walk from the kitchen to the living room and hear it just behind me, like little feet scuttling across the floor. One evening, I stood by the window scrolling on my phone when I noticed it. Across the street, under the swaying branches of a massive oak, someone was standing perfectly still. At first I thought it was a trick of the failing light, a shadow cast by the tree. But then it moved, shifting just enough that the one street lamp caught on something pale. A face. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep much after that. A week later, I found a note slipped under my door. No envelope, just a single sheet of lined paper, written in frantic, jagged script. Get out while you can. It knows you now. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, the paper trembling in my grip. The logical part of my brain insisted it was a prank. Kids messing around, trying to scare the new guy. But the rest of me, the part that woke up gasping in the middle of the night, clutching at imagined shapes in the dark, felt a sickening certainty. Someone had been inside. I started locking the bedroom door at night, propping a chair under the knob like I'd seen in movies. I set up a cheap baby monitor facing my bed. I told myself it was so I'd have proof of sleepwalking, nothing more. The first night I watched the playback, all I saw was me tossing and turning. I almost felt relieved, but the second night, around 3:17 a.m., the monitor picked up movement. A figure stepped into frame, thin, stooped, features blurred by darkness. It stood at the foot of my bed, head cocked slightly, watching me. Then, slowly, it bent forward, placing its face inches from mine. I never stirred. After a few agonizing seconds, it straightened and drifted out of view. I replayed that clip over and over, hoping to catch some clue that it was a trick of the light, a glitch. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong, very wrong. And whatever it was, it wasn't just haunting the apartment. It was haunting me. The next evening, I sat on the couch, clutching a mug of cold coffee, eyes glued to the baby monitor feed on my phone. I hadn't slept since I found that footage. Every squeak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes, set my heart hammering in my chest. I told myself I'd stay up all night, prove to myself there was nothing to fear. Maybe the footage was doctored somehow, an elaborate prank. Maybe I was cracking under the weight of grief and loneliness. But as midnight ticked by, the apartment felt heavier, like the air itself thickened with each passing minute. At 2:45 a.m., the ticking sound returned. This time, it was louder, like fingernails drumming on the inside of the walls. I muted the TV and strained to listen. The ticking moved, skittering from one corner of the room to another, circling me. Just the pipes, I whispered, but my voice sounded hollow, unconvinced. Then it stopped. Silence ballooned around me, so absolute it pressed against my eardrums. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until a whisper slid through the quiet. So close it seemed to rasp directly into my ear. "Marcus." I leaped to my feet, the mug crashing to the floor, coffee splattering like blood across the carpet. My eyes darted around the dim room, but it was empty, just me, the overturned mug, and the echo of my racing pulse. I staggered to the hallway and flipped on every light. Brightness flooded the apartment, chasing away the shadows. But it didn't chase away the certainty that I wasn't alone. That night, I left every lamp burning. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard, phone clutched in my sweating palm, baby monitor feed open and ready. At 3:17 a.m., exactly, the monitor's screen flickered. I sucked in a sharp breath, waiting to see that stooped figure again. But instead of the foot of my bed, the camera was pointed at the ceiling. Confused, I adjusted the angle remotely. That's when I realized Di hadn't moved it. Someone else had. The feed crackled, static dancing across the screen. Then it went black. A soft creak came from just outside my bedroom door. I jumped, up so fast I nearly tripped over the blankets, heart battering against my ribs. The chair I'd wedged under the doorknob shuddered slightly, as if something had nudged it from the other side. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. I hated how weak it sounded. Silence, then another gentle push. The chair scraped forward an inch. I stumbled back until I hit the far wall, eyes locked on the doorknob, watching it twitch like it was, straining to turn. Suddenly, all movement stopped. The apartment fell silent again, but it wasn't a comforting silence. It was the tense hush of something waiting. I stood there until dawn, too afraid to blink. The following day, I tried to convince myself it was sleep deprivation. Maybe I dreamed the whisper. Maybe the chair moved because the floor was uneven. Maybe. I spent hours replaying the baby monitor footage, but the last recording was corrupted. Just a mess of garbled pixels and shrieking digital noise that made my skin crawl. I needed air. I left the apartment and walked aimlessly through the neighborhood, ignoring the curious stares of my neighbors. Their houses all seemed to lean away from mine, as if recoiling. By the time I returned, dusk was swallowing the street. The sun dipped behind the trees, their branches clawing at the fading light. I hesitated at my front steps. My apartment loomed ahead, windows dark and empty. It felt like it was watching me. Inside, the smell hit me immediately, damp, musty, like earth freshly turned by a shovel. The same smell from the basement. That was when I noticed the dirt. It was scattered across the living room floor, tiny clumps leading in a winding trail toward my bedroom. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to follow it, but my feet moved on their own, drawn by a horrible curiosity. The trail ended at my closet door. I stood there, hand hovering over the knob, every instinct in me screaming to run. But something deeper, darker, urged me on. I twisted the handle and pulled. Nothing, just my clothes, swaying slightly on their hangers. I let out a shaky laugh. God, I was losing it. Then, from somewhere deep inside the closet, I heard it. Marcus. The whisper was so soft I thought I might have imagined it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, reacting to something I couldn't see. I slammed the door shut and backed away, heart thundering. That night, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the apartment. I grabbed my keys and drove aimlessly for hours. I didn't care where I went, as long as it was far from there. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to pull over at a rundown highway motel. The clerk didn't even glance up when I handed over my card. I collapsed on the lumpy bed fully clothed, clutching the baby monitor receiver like a lifeline. I must have dozed off, because I woke to static crackling from the monitor. Blearily, I squinted at the screen. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. My bedroom. The feed was active again, somehow linked back to my apartment. At first, it looked empty. Then something shifted in the corner, a shape, hunched low to the ground, crawling on all fours. I couldn't make out any details, just the sickening way its limbs moved, too many joints bending the wrong way. It crept to my bed and slowly rose, its head scraping the ceiling. For a heartbeat, it simply stood there, looming over the empty mattress. Then it turned directly toward the camera. I dropped the monitor, bile rising in my throat. A soft laugh echoed through the tiny motel room, even though I was alone. I didn't sleep at all after that. When dawn finally broke, I drove back to the apartment with shaking hands. I told myself I'd pack a bag and leave for good. Find a sublet, crash on a friend's couch, anything. But as I pulled into the driveway, my stomach sank. The front door was ajar, yawning open like a dark mouth. I should have driven away, but something compelled me forward, a force I couldn't name. Inside, the apartment was eerily still. The trail of dirt was gone, the air stale and heavy. I stepped carefully through the living room, every creak of the floor echoing like a gunshot. When I reached my bedroom, I froze. Written on the wall, above my bed, in jagged letters that looked like they'd been carved into the plaster, was a single word. Stay. That was when I realized my fear was exactly what it wanted, and somehow I was already too far gone to resist. The days after discovering the word carved into my wall blurred together, a smear of sleepless nights and trembling mornings. I tried to keep some semblance of normalcy, went to work, sat through meetings, responded to emails, but my mind wasn't there. It was trapped back inside the apartment, replaying every creak, every whisper, every chilling moment on loop. At the office, I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, someone slipping around a cubicle, ducking behind a door. But whenever I turned, there was no one. Once, I saw my own reflection in the black screen of my monitor, except it wasn't quite right. My eyes were too dark, my smile too wide. When I blinked, it was gone, leaving me with a sour taste in my mouth. I started avoiding mirrors. I couldn't trust them anymore. The hallucinations, or whatever they were, followed me home. I'd be standing at the kitchen sink when the tap would suddenly turn itself on, water gushing until it overflowed and pooled on the floor. I'd snap off the handle, only to turn and see muddy footprints leading down the hall, vanishing around the corner. When I ran to follow them, they'd be gone. At night, the whispering grew more insistent. It wasn't just saying my name anymore. It murmured in fragmented sentences, threats, promises, nonsense. Sometimes I'd hear my mother's voice, soft and tremulous, calling me from the dark. "Marcus, why didn't you come sooner? It's so cold here." Other times, I'd hear myself, but speaking words I couldn't remember ever saying. "Stay with me forever. We belong here." I started keeping a knife under my pillow. I didn't know what I expected to do with it, whether I feared an intruder or something much worse, but it offered a tiny sliver of comfort. One evening, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and booked a flight out of state to stay with an old college friend. Anything to get away from that apartment. I left early the next morning. As I locked the door behind me, I felt a weight lift from my chest. For the first time in weeks, I breathed deeply without that suffocating sense of being watched. But at the airport, just as I was about to board, I reached for my ticket and found nothing. My pockets were empty. I tore through my bag, panic rising in my throat. No ticket, no wallet, even my phone was gone. Frantic, I ran back through the terminal, certain someone had pickpocketed me. But a cold thought slowly pushed its way through. The panic, I'd never brought them. In my mind, I could clearly see them sitting neatly on my kitchen counter at home, right where I'd left them last night. It was like something wanted me to stay. Shaking, I returned to the apartment. The door was ajar again, swinging gently as if waiting. Inside, the air smelled sweet, almost inviting. The walls seemed to sigh when I stepped across the threshold, settling comfortably around me. I dropped my bag in the hall and sank onto the couch, exhausted. Part of me wondered if I'd ever really left. Maybe I'd just imagined the airport, the entire attempt to flee a hallucination designed to keep me hopeful, only to crush me back here. That was when I realized how much of my life had started to blur like that. What if none of it had been real? The moral dilemma began subtly, in ways that almost made sense at first. One night, I awoke to the sound of weeping. I staggered out of bed and followed it, half asleep, down the hallway. In the living room, a woman sat on my couch. Her hair was tangled and dark, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Who are you?" I managed to croak. She didn't look up. Instead, she held out her hands. They were covered in blood, dripping onto my floor. "Help me," she whispered. Before I could move, she vanished, simply blinked out of existence, leaving only dark stains behind. The next morning, I found a small pool of blood on the floor where she'd sat. I tried to clean it, but it smeared into grotesque shapes that looked almost like symbols. Then came the children. I started hearing them at nights, small feet pattering across the hall, giggles echoing from the kitchen. Once, I opened my bedroom, door and nearly stepped on a little girl standing there in a tattered dress. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to suck the light from the room. "Will you play with us?" she asked, voice high and cracked. I slammed the door and locked it, heart pounding. Hours later, I woke to find tiny handprints smeared across the inside of my bedroom window. That same day, a letter arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single line, written in that same jagged script I'd seen on my wall. "They can be free if you let them take your place." I dropped the letter like it was a live coal. My mind raced. Was that what it wanted? A trade, my life for theirs. That night, I dreamed of the children again. They stood in a circle around my bed, whispering in voices that layered over each other until it was just an unintelligible hum. When I tried to sit up, I found I couldn't move my body, pinned by invisible hands. Then the little girl stepped forward, her hollow eyes inches from mine. "It's not so bad," she said. "You won't be alone anymore." I woke screaming, drenched in sweat. Reality continued to unravel. I'd find myself standing in strange places with no memory of how I got there on the back porch at 3 a.m., staring out into the trees. In the basement, barefoot, my toes sunk into cold earth. Once I snapped out of it to find myself standing at the stove, knife in hand, a raw piece of meat on the cutting board that I didn't remember buying. I was sure I was losing my mind. Then one evening, I got a call from my sister Jenna. "Marcus, you okay?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I've been trying to reach you for days. You haven't been answering." I've just been busy," I lied. There was a pause. "You sound strange. Marcus, maybe you should come stay with me for a while. Just until you sort things out." I almost agreed. I wanted to. But then I heard its soft laughter crackling over the line, even though Jenna had gone silent. A familiar voice whispered close to the speaker. "She can't save you. No one can." I hung up and threw my phone across the room, where it shattered against the wall. Days melted together. I couldn't trust the clocks anymore. They'd spin wildly or freeze for hours. Sometimes the sun would set and then immediately rise again, flooding my apartment with sickly orange light. I caught my reflection watching me, not in a metaphorical sense literally. I'd look away from a mirror and see it still staring at me from the corner of my eye, smiling that too wide grin. At night, the voices became pleading, bargaining. "Just open the door, Marcus. Let us in. Let us be with you." I barricaded myself in my bedroom, pushing furniture against the door. I covered the mirrors, stuffed towels under the cracks so nothing could whisper through. But the apartment seemed to breathe around me, walls pulsing with a slow, hungry rhythm. It didn't matter how many barriers I built, it was already inside. Then the dilemma became clear. One night, I found myself standing over my bed, knife in hand, staring down at my own sleeping body. For a split second, the two versions of me locked eyes, my reflection lying there, mouth curved in that unnatural smile, eyes black and bottomless. "Do it," it whispered. "End this. Give us what we want." My hands trembled. The knife felt impossibly heavy. If I did it, if I drove the blade into that grinning version of myself, maybe it would finally be over. Maybe the children would be free. Maybe I would be free. But a part of me recoiled in horror. Was this even real? Was I about to murder myself in some twisted hallucination? Or was this all a test, one last push to break me completely? I dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor, and the figure on the bed dissolved into shadow, melting into the sheets, until there was nothing left. After that, things escalated. I began hearing knocking from inside the walls, slow and deliberate, like someone trapped behind them was begging to be let out. Sometimes the knocking spelled patterns: 3 quick, taps, 2 slow, 3 quick again. I'd lie awake trying to decode it, certain it was a message meant just for me. Food rotted instantly. I'd bring home groceries only to watch them blacken and collapse into sludge as soon as I set them down. Water from the tap ran rust red, tasting of iron and decay. And always, there were the children, waiting at the edges of my vision, watching, smiling, whispering about how it could all be so much easier if I'd just say yes. The moral weight crushed me. Each night they came, promising peace, promising I wouldn't be alone, that the darkness would embrace me like family. All it would cost was my will to resist my soul, if such a thing existed. Some nights, I almost said yes. I'd feel my lips part, the word on the tip of my tongue, stay. But something always stopped me, a shred of instinct, buried deep, screaming that once I agreed, there'd be no coming back. So I clung to that fragile piece of myself, even as reality splintered further, even as I began to doubt that I'd ever been sane. Because in the moments when everything went silent, when the whispers paused and the walls stopped breathing, I would remember, I never chose this, and I would not give them the satisfaction of surrender. It started with a smell, not the usual musty rot that lingered in the apartment, but something far worse, acrid, chemical-like burning hair mixed with spoiled meat. It seeped under my door in oily waves, curling around my legs, worming up into my nostrils until I gagged. I stumbled from my barricaded bedroom, half blinded by tears. The living room was drenched in darkness, shadows crowding so thick it felt like I was wading through ink. The overhead light wouldn't turn on. My fingers fumbled across the wall switch, but it might as well have been dead plastic. That was when I heard it, a low, throaty breathing. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, behind the couch, under the floorboards, maybe even inside my own chest. Each inhale rattled with hunger. Each exhale vibrated with a wet, gurgling promise. I backed up until my heel hit something soft. Looking down, I saw the couch cushion bulge outward, as if something beneath it was pushing up. Slowly, almost curiously, a single hand broke through the fabric. It was too long, with spindly fingers that ended in cracked yellow nails. Its skin was a sickly gray, slick and glistening as if coated in some foul slime. It caressed the edge of the couch, feeling its way like a blind spider. Then it tapped, once, twice, thrice, the same pattern that had haunted my walls for weeks. I wanted to run. Every muscle screamed for it, but my legs locked, refusing to obey. Marcus, the voice was no longer a whisper. It was a growl that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. The hand slipped back into the couch with a wet pop. Then silence. I whirled, adrenaline finally kicking in, and bolted for the door. My hands shook so badly, I nearly dropped the keys. The lock resisted me turning halfway before sticking, as if something inside it was clogged or twisted. No, not yet. The words were right beside my ear. Hot breath swept across my neck. I swung around, keys clenched like a weapon, but the hallway was empty. My heart thundered so violently I thought it might tear itself free. I tried the lock again, gritting my teeth. This time it turned with a shuddering groan. I wrenched the door open and found myself staring into my own apartment. Same couch, same battered coffee table, same smear of old blood on the wall from the first night the woman had appeared. I staggered back, slammed the door, then reopened. It's still my apartment. I was trapped. Panic clawed up my throat. I staggered from room to room, flinging open windows, only to find brick walls pressed inches beyond the glass. In the bathroom mirror, my reflection stood with its back to me, unmoving. When I touched the glass, it turned its head and grinned with shattered teeth. I fled, my stomach churning. Everywhere I went, the smell followed, the breathing followed. Sometimes it even felt like the apartment itself moved, floorboards heaving under my feet, doorways narrowing so I had to squeeze through sideways. Then, one terrible night, I found it fully revealed. I woke in my bed, though I couldn't remember falling asleep. The room was dark, but not with the familiar friendly shadows of night. This darkness pulsed, alive, as though I lay inside a vast, wet lung. A weight settled on the edge of the mattress. I froze, the springs groaning under an immense mass. Then I felt it shift closer. Something cold and damp pressed against my chica. Snout, I realized. Breath poured over me, rank with rot. Slowly, trembling, I turned my head. It towered above me, impossible in size, its body a tangle of limbs that shifted and reknitted like worms in raw meat. Its head was vaguely human, but stretched long, with empty eye sockets that oozed black tears. A grin split its face from ear to ear, jagged teeth, slick with strings of red saliva. It didn't move. It simply watched, its mouth twitching like it was trying to form words. Then it leaned close, its slit nostrils flaring as it inhaled me, my scent, my fear, my very essence. We've done this before, it rumbled in a voice that seemed to come from inside my own skull. So many times. You always try to leave. You always fail. It reached out a hand, a long, clawed hand that brushed my hair back almost tenderly. Shall we begin again? I bolted upright in bed, drenched in sweat, gasping. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. Birds chirped outside. My alarm buzzed cheerfully on the nightstand. A dream, just a nightmare. I nearly sobbed with relief. Climbing out of bed, I shuffled to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked up into the mirror. There, written in dark streaks that looked suspiciously like blood, was a single word across the glass. Begin. I fell into a numb routine. Wake up, find new horrors waiting, stumble through the day like a sleepwalker. Every night, it returned. Sometimes I woke with muddy footprints on my floor. Sometimes I found new messages scratched into my walls. You belong to us, or stay with me. Once, I woke with dirt packed under my fingernails and the taste of earth on my tongue. It was as if it was playing with me, pushing me just to the brink of madness, then pulling back, testing how far it could bend me before I broke completely. One evening, driven by a desperate idea, I forced myself to go down to the basement. I hadn't dared since that first discovery. Armed with a flashlight and my kitchen knife, I descended the creaking stairs. The smell was overwhelming here, thick and cloying. It felt moist, like I was breathing through a damp rag. At the bottom, my light swept across crumbling stone walls, old wooden beams, and then caught on something new. A door. Not the splintered utility door I remembered. This was different, tall, made of dark wood, bound in corroded iron bands. Strange symbols were carved into it, shifting subtly when I tried to focus. Drawn by a force I couldn't resist, I reached out and pressed my hand against it. The wood was warm, almost feverish. It seemed to pulse under my palm. The door swung inward. Beyond was blackness deeper than anything I'd ever seen. I stepped through, the darkness swallowing me whole. When I came to, I stood back in my living room, but something was horribly wrong. The walls bled a thick, tar-like fluid. The windows showed only more windows and infinite reflection of my own apartment, stretching on forever. In the center of the room, the monster waited. It crouched on all fours, its bulk heaving, mouth open in a silent scream. Tendrils of shadow writhed from its back, slithering across the floor and caressing my feet. This is home now, it breathed. You're finally beginning to understand. I tried to back away, but the shadows tightened around my ankles, holding me fast. They dragged me closer until I stood face to face with its gaping maw. Inside, I saw memories not just mine, but countless others. Faces twisted in terror, people begging, clawing at walls, sobbing as the darkness consumed them. You've always been here, it said, from the very first time you opened that door. Every escape, every nightmare, every morning you thought was a new start, was all part of me, part of us. I shook my head violently. tears streaking down my cheeks. No, I moved here a month ago. I have a life, friends, a sister. Do you? It hissed. Images flashed in my mind. My sister Jenna, standing in her kitchen, her eyes hollow, her face slack, repeating the same motion over and over, as if stuck on a loop. My office, rows of desks empty, except for blurred, faceless figures. The airport, people all moving in perfect sync, not a single real soul among them. You never left. It purred. You never will. Then it leaned closer. From somewhere deep in its throat, a soft laugh bubbled up, a sound almost childlike. Shall we begin again? I woke in bed. Same sweat-soaked sheets. Same bright morning sunlight. Same birds outside. On my nightstand, my alarm clock flashed 3:17 a.m. Even though it was clearly daylight, I let out a broken laugh. The loop. It had always been a loop. No matter what I did, it would start over. A new day, a new chance for the horror to unfold, exactly as it wanted. I stood and turned to the mirror. My reflection smiled first, then lifted a hand in a mocking wave. Somewhere deep in the apartment, I heard the monster breathing, waiting, hungry, and deep down, a sick part of me wondered if this was where I was meant to be. Why did I keep fighting it? Why not just give in? As the shadows crept toward my feet, I felt the loop tighten, and in that instant, I almost welcomed it. Ask ChatGPT. I don't know how many times I woke in that bed, or how many times I tried to convince myself it was over. Every morning felt the same. My heart would hammer with a thin thread of hope. Maybe this was real. Maybe I could claw my way back to normal life if I moved quickly enough. But every day ended the same. Shadows lengthening, the monster's breath echoing in the walls, the air turning cold and wet with the scent of rotting leaves. I needed a plan. I began testing the edges of my prison. Every day, I'd push a little further. I smashed through a boarded-up window once, only to tumble directly into my own hallway. I cut through the drywall, hacking until my hands bled, only to reveal more rooms identical to mine, each with tiny, mocking differences. My old high school trophies on the shelf, a photograph of me with strangers who all had my face. It was as if the apartment was infinite, like it bent itself to keep me inside. But that didn't stop me. The next time the loop restarted, I prepared. I tied sheets into ropes, packed a bag with food, water, tools. I stayed awake for as long as possible, guzzling coffee, gnawing raw nerves into focus. And when the ticking started, the horrible claw tapping against the wall's eye didn't freeze this time. I forced myself toward it. The sound led me back to the basement. The door was there again, the strange iron-banded door that shouldn't exist. I gripped the handle. It felt hot, as if it might sear my skin, but I held on. When I pushed it open, blackness rolled out like smoke. I stepped through without hesitating. This time was different. Instead of waking in my living room, I stumbled into a forest. Towering trees rose in all directions, their trunks slick with some dark ichor. Their branches writhed overhead like skeletal fingers. The air buzzed with a high, insect-like drone that seemed to crawl under my skin. Relief almost broke me right. There, I had never made it this far. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches tore at my clothes, sliced thin lines across my cheeks. Roots shifted to catch my ankles, but I leaped over them, gasping, determined not to be pulled down. Behind me, I heard it, the monstrous, ragged breathing. Louder now, moving through the trees with terrifying speed. Sometimes I'd glimpse its shape in the shadows, a long, grotesque silhouette melting in and out of the trunks, always grinning, always watching. Marcus, it sang, a parody of affection. Asterisk, you can't leave. This is home. I screamed and pushed harder, lungs burning, heart thrashing. Eventually the trees began to thin. Up ahead, I saw an impossible shape, a doorway standing alone in the clearing, framed by nothing. It was identical to the door in my basement, right down to the iron bands and shifting symbols. But beyond it was light, real, golden sunlight, spilling through, illuminating grass and a wide, bright sky. I staggered toward it, every step agony. As I reached the threshold, I felt something wrap around my ankle, a tendril of shadow, cold and slick. I turned to see it fully formed now, the monster rising from the ground, its many limbs unfolding like a grotesque flower. Its face was inches from mine, jaws hanging open in a hungry, endless grin. Its hollow eyes glowed with a terrible light. "You think this door is your salvation?" It growled, voice vibrating in my bones. "It's just another room, Marcus. Another piece of me." I squeezed my eyes shut. I don't care. And I jumped through. I landed hard on warm grass, air bursting from my lungs. Birds chirped overhead. A breeze whispered through tall oaks. The sun shone brilliantly, and for the first time in what felt like years, it didn't feel wrong. I lay there, sobbing, laughter bubbling up with each gasping breath. I was free. When I finally sat up, I realized I was on the edge of a small town. People walked by, normal people, smiling, chatting. No empty eyes, no twisted reflections. My hands trembled as I wiped tears from my face. I could start over, forget all of it, maybe even find Jenna. I stepped into the street. A little girl bumped into me and looked up, giggling. But when our eyes met, something twisted in my gut. Her smile stretched impossibly wide. "Welcome back," she whispered. Then the sky cracked. It split open like brittle glass, and through the jagged fissures spilled black tendrils. They slithered across the sun, staining it, darkening it to a sickly red. People on the street froze, heads snapping toward me in perfect unison. Their eyes were hollow voids, their mouths opening in the same impossible grin. "Marcus," they chorused, voices blending into that monstrous growl. "Shall we begin again?" I staggered backward, colliding with a lamppost. The world peeled away, buildings crumbling into ash, grass blackening to rot. I spun and bolted down an alley. At the far end was another door, identical to all the others. I flung it open and plunged through. This time, I landed in my apartment. Of course, same coffee table, same stain on the wall, same smell of damp earth, except not quite. On the couch sat my sister Jenna. She looked up and smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's okay now, Marcus," she said. "You can rest. You've been fighting so long." I fell to my knees in front of her, clutching her hands. They were warm, alive. "Please, Jenna, tell me this is real. Tell me you're really here." She leaned forward and kissed my forehead. "It doesn't have to hurt anymore. All you have to do is stay." I closed my eyes. God, I was so tired. Maybe she was right. Maybe then her hands tightened on mine, too tight, nails digging in until I felt warm blood trickle down. I opened my eyes. Her face was still smiling, but her skin rippled, cracked, split. Hollow eyes stared back at me from beneath the mask of her flesh, teeth far too long slicing through her lips. "Stay, Marcus," the monster purred in her voice. "It's where you belong." I ripped free, stumbling back. The thing that wore my sister's skin stood, body unfolding into grotesque shapes. Its limbs scraped the ceiling, claws gouging, deep furrows into the plaster. I ran down the hallway, through the kitchen, trying door after door, opening into another version of my apartment, sometimes pristine, sometimes charred and blackened, sometimes full of weeping figures that turned hollow eyes toward me. No matter how many doors I tried, it always led me back. Finally, I collapsed in my bedroom. The monster filled the doorway, grinning wide. "You see now," it crooned. *, "there is no escape. You are part of me. You always have been." Each attempt to flee only feeds the loop. Your terror is delicious. I pressed my back against the far wall, breath coming in ragged gasps. What are you? Why me? It cocked its head, because you let me in, long before you moved here. Long before you ever saw this apartment. All those nights, you whispered, into the dark, begging someone to take away your loneliness. I heard you, I answered. Memories slammed into me nights in my old bedroom as a kid, crying into my pillow, wishing the shadows would hold me so I didn't feel so empty. Nights as an adult, drunk and sobbing on the floor, muttering I'd give anything not to be alone. I had called it. I had invited it. The monster crept closer, claws tapping in that hateful rhythm. Shall we begin again? And with that, it reached out and pressed a claw gently to my forehead. My vision went white, blinding, searing. I screamed, feeling my mind twist and fracture, memories shredding like paper in fire. I woke up. In my bed, sunlight streamed through the window. My alarm buzzed cheerily. I laughed, a thin, broken sound. But when I swung my legs off the bed, the floor was soft, damp earth, not carpet. I looked down and saw black soil oozing up between my toes. In the mirror, my reflection was already waiting, smiling that too wide smile. And from somewhere deep in the apartment, the monster breathed. Welcome home, Marcus. Shall we begin again? It was then I realized my greatest fear had come true, not dying, not even being consumed, but being trapped forever, alone yet, never alone, in a cycle I had invited, a nightmare I would never escape, and worst of all, a small traitorous part of me liked it. I sit here now, back on my couch, the same couch where this all began. My knees are pulled to my chest, arms wrapped tight around them like I might somehow hold myself together through sheer force. Outside, the wind howls against the windows. The branches claw at the glass in frantic patterns. The apartment is dim, lit only by a single weak lamp that flickers as if it might die any second. I watch the baby monitor feed on my phone, though there's no baby, never was. It sits on the coffee table, screen alive with static that dances like tiny white insects. Every so often, it clears just long enough for me to see the foot of my bed, to see the shape that waits there, the same shape that waited there in the very beginning. I've tried everything, barricading doors, smashing mirrors, clawing at the walls until my fingers bled. But every morning I wake up in this same apartment, the loop tightening a little more around my throat. I hear the monster's breathing now, slow and patient. It comes from inside the walls, from under the floor, from within me. Sometimes it whispers my name in that deep, rumbling voice that rattles my ribs. Sometimes it simply laughs. But tonight is different, because tonight, as I stare at the baby monitor, I see something that freezes the breath in my lungs. On the screen, the shape at the foot of the bed moves. Slowly, deliberately, it lifts its head, and for the first time, I see its face clearly. It's mine. My face belled and stretched, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in a grotesque smile that splits, impossibly wide. It tilts its head, studying me through the screen with a horrible intimacy, as if we've shared this secret all along. Then it lifts a hand and waves, just like my reflection did so many loops ago. A laugh bubbles up from my chest, ragged and wet. It doesn't even sound like me anymore. Is this what I've become, or what I always was? I don't know. All I know is that the baby monitor crackles again, and this time, instead of showing my room, it flickers to another apartment, different furniture, different stains on the wall, but the same oppressive darkness curling at the edges, and sitting there, on another couch, is someone else, a man I've never seen before, wide-eyed and clutching his own monitor, trembling in the dim light. He looks straight at me, or maybe through me. Then the screen cuts to static. I realize with a shudder that this isn't just my nightmare, it's ours. And somewhere out there, someone else is just beginning to hear the whispers. Somewhere else. The loop is starting anew, and the monster, it's always hungry. The wind howls again. I glance at the baby monitor. The shape at the foot of my bed shifts, rising slowly. And in that instant between one heartbeat and the next I know, it's time to begin again. Ask ChatGPT.